These are the first notes in my Honors Holocaust and Genocide course. Um, of course, we're going to have to define genocide and define Holocaust in the course called Holocaust and Genocide. We're also going to be defining the term ethnic cleansing as well. So those three terms are really what you're going to need to do to be able to know after these notes. So first of all, why even bother learning the definitions? Why are they so important? And they are important. I'll explain to you, I guess, why. But keep in mind during these notes there is going to be a quiz on the definition of genocide. You should know the definition of Holocaust and of ethnic cleansing, but the definition of genocide is probably the most important. If you have to pick one to know, it should be that one. It's going to be a fill in the blank quiz. I copied and pasted the definition of genocide, took out some words, and you're just going to fill in those blanks. So you really do need to know that definition like the back of your hand. You're going to need to know that throughout the course, even on the final exam. I know I have questions about something like use the Armenian genocide or your knowledge on the Armenian genocide to prove that it's a Holocaust, or sorry, to prove that it's a genocide. And you would need to know the definition for genocide and also what happened in that genocide, and kind of compare the two. So it is really something that you're going to need to know throughout this course. But going back to why we even need to learn about definitions, it's not the most fun thing. No one, learns definitions in their free time, but obviously words can be pretty important. If you remember that phrase your parents probably told you when kids made fun of you at school, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Do you think that's true? I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, you've never been hit with sticks and stones, or really one or the other. But I assume it would not be awesome, and it probably would break your bones. But words can't hurt your bones. We know that words obviously can be hurtful, and they can hurt you in maybe non-physical ways that sometimes manifest themselves physically. We've seen, all these mass shootings, unfortunately, and we know that it probably at some point kind of came from words. So at first, words don't seem harmful, but they can kind of plant a seed, which can, of course, lead to some negative consequences or positive consequences if they're positive words as well. um, so what's the point of saying something is a genocide? You hear this word get thrown around a lot, unfortunately. Like a lot of really important words, they're thrown around a lot just to make people's opinions sound more extreme and more and almost like entertaining. People use the word awesome for all kinds of things, like these French fries are awesome. And then you have your first child, and they ask you what's the experience like of having a child? And you're like, oh, it's just awesome. Like, oh, it's like the French fries you had that day. And of course, that's not the same thing, but that's what happens when we throw these words around like they're nothing. So genocide is a word that really should be used appropriately, like lots of other words. There are some other labels that carry a significance. If you can think of any, that would be great. I can't really have you tell me right now. You can talk to your phones if you want. That's kind of weird, but I've seen weirder things happen. But maybe just think about that. What are some other labels that carry significance? We're going to do one example on here. Now, do these labels have power? Do they have an influence? Some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, maybe you have a nickname, and I don't know what that nickname could be. It could maybe be a shortened version of your name or something else, and maybe that has a significance, maybe it doesn't. Um, but the ones we're going to talk about today obviously have a pretty big significance, have a pretty heavy impact on things. So here's my example: friend zone. This is a relatively new word. We didn't really have it when I was in high school. But I'm sure people that I went to high school with wish we had, because it clears things up, and that's what words should do is make things pretty. I mean, that's the point of words, right? Is to communicate feelings and communicate sentiments. Um, so if you don't have this word, then it could be kind of ambiguous what you're talking about there, right? So can they affect a situation? Well, if we didn't have this term, it would be kind of tough to communicate what kind of relationship we're having here, or lack of relationship we're having here. Hopefully this doesn't, hurt anybody in a personal way. But it shouldn't. If someone tells you you're in the friend zone, then just kind of move on, I would say. Anyways, that's enough dating advice for you from me. So if you don't have this term, friend zone, then you would hear something like, well, I think, we're just friends right now. Now, what's that mean? To the person saying it, they're pretty much saying, well, I don't really like you like that. I just want to be your friend. But the person on the receiving end, maybe they can interpret it that way, but that's usually not how it went. It usually went, well, they just need to know me better, or I need to try harder, or I need to show them and kind of prove myself. And that's kind of was always a disaster, if I remember correctly. Of course, not from personal experience. So both people would have different interpretations of the relationship, like I just talked about. But if you have a specific term for it, well, now everybody knows. Well, maybe not knows, but everyone should know kind of what's going on here. If I say apple, you know exactly what an apple is. But if I say red fruit, well, that's not very clear. It could be apple or raspberry or strawberry. So having this defined, universally understood term helps you communicate better. And we hear a lot about fake news, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, and actual events being ambiguous. People really don't know what to believe. And hopefully this word genocide will, if it's agreed upon that is an actual genocide, then everyone would really understand what that means if they know the definition. All right, we're going to skip this. The first term before we get into genocide is Holocaust. So I need you to write this down in your notes. Excuse me. You can go ahead and pause it while you need to write it down. I'll read it to you. Maybe that will help as you're writing. So the Holocaust was the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Now, you're probably not thinking about the definition because you're writing it, which is fine, but after you're done writing it, after you've paused this so you can copy that down, think about it. Is there something that's missing there? Because most students I have in this class kind of have an idea of genocide or the Holocaust already, and they know that, yeah, of course, most Jewish people were killed during the Holocaust, but there's also 5 million non-Jewish people who were killed. Just remember, the figures are 6 million Jewish people and then 5 million non-Jewish people. We're talking homosexuals, we're talking Poles and other Slavs, we're talking Roma. You may have heard the word gypsy before. We use the word Roma now. It's more, I guess it's more politically correct. Disabled people mentally, physically. Those are some of the groups who were killed based on not what they did, but who they were. And that's an important distinction to make in genocide. So if you're killed for breaking a law, or if you're killed for fighting against a country, and maybe you're killed for an unfair reason or unfair law, but that still wouldn't be genocide. It's basically you're being killed because of who you are, which you really can't control. So you might wonder why that's missing. How come it's not? Those people aren't included. And that's a good question, but I think really the answer is that since most people killed were Jews, if you add more different types of people in there, that it might kind of water down the whole idea that it was mainly Jewish people. Maybe that might not seem right to you, but I can kind of see definitely both sides of that. Maybe someday down the line we'll change that, but right now that's where it stands. Is technically the whole Holocaust was just the killing of Jewish people during World War II and before World War II. So the Holocaust is an example of genocide. Oh, you know what? This H isn't capitalized. That's a problem. So a little pet peeve of mine, if you don't capitalize proper events like the Holocaust, then I'm going to ask you to do so, even though I didn't do that, and I'm kind of embarrassed by that. But yeah, Holocaust is a specific event, so it should be capitalized. Anyway, so the Holocaust is a genocide, but not every genocide is a Holocaust. Holocaust is a specific example of a genocide. So what do you think the word genocide is? What is a genocide? People say, well, lots of people are killed. Okay, but lots of people are killed all the time. Cancer doesn't genocide people, right? What is a genocide? Well, the definition is pretty complex. Here it is. before you're writing, you might want to kind of stretch your hand out, maybe do some hand exercises because it's pretty long, I realize, but you are going to need this definition. So make sure you write it neatly so you can read it. Again, this is going to be a quiz. I took this definition, I copy and pasted it, I took some important terms out, I think 16. I'm going to have you fill those blanks in. Usually people do well. It's usually like one of those, 70% of people get 100 and 15% get like an 80 something, and then 50% get like a 5. Hopefully you're not one of those people. So look it over. Of course, if you're close, then I'll give it to you. So like if, for example, if you write kids instead of children, I'm not going to be that guy. It's fine. But moving kids instead of transferring children, yeah, that's fine too, as long as you get the idea of it. So I'll be a little bit lenient there. So I'll read it. I'm sure you're already writing it. Maybe you paused it. Maybe you already wrote it. But I'll read it again. Any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So we're kind of going to break down each part of this definition. The first part is about who can be targeted for genocide. So there's 4 groups of people who can be targeted here: national, ethnical, racial, or religious. So you can't, if the government wants to target left-handed people, that's not a genocide, even though it seems like it would be. Not based on the definition we have now. So national, someone in a specific country or political state is what they mean by a country there, to which they belong or they are affiliated with. Ethnic and racial are pretty similar. Maybe thought it was the same thing. It's pretty close. So racial is your genetic makeup, or ethnic is a group that you're in. So ethnic or racial can be part of an ethnicity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. An example between ethnic and racial is, if you think about maybe someone is a white person, that's their race, but they live in Ireland, so they're Irish, that's their ethnicity. So you can see that is a little bit different there. It could also be their national. But what if someone in Ireland, they say, well, I see myself more of, that I belong to Ulster, which is a region in Ireland. That could also be ethnic, where it's not national. I know we're kind of splitting hairs here, but I think the point is that the definition, they want to make sure that you can't kind of find a loophole in here. And then religion, that part's pretty obvious, I think. Okay, so the next part is what a group of people could do that could be actually considered genocide. Now, everyone knows the first one, killing members of the group. That's kind of what we usually think of as genocide. The second and third one are usually surprises for people, causing serious bodily, mental harm to members of the group. So if you, for example, I don't know, cut arms and legs off of people, or hopefully not both, hopefully neither, but you get the idea, hopefully. Just kind of put them through a lot of anguish, maybe remove them from their homes, find a way to ensure that they're living at a really destitute level. You don't let them work, you don't let them have money. That could be considered possibly genocide. And then the third action here is inflicting on the group conditions calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part. So if you took everybody in this group and put them on a deserted island, then you could say, well, I didn't kill anybody, so I didn't commit genocide. But that would fit with number three, because you can't really live that long on a deserted island. Assuming it's like just a desert island, deserted island. That'd be really bad. I mean, you could maybe live at a desert island, but anyways, so that that's there. Also, an example of that would be if you tried to sterilize people, like you made it so they wouldn't be able to have children anymore. That's another form of action that could be considered genocide. Okay, so like I said before, preventing births within the group, and then transferring children of the group to another group. Well, why is that genocide? Genocide is about killing people, but it's more, I think, about killing an identity or destroying an identity of people, whether it's their religion or their their ethnicity. And if you do this with children, then you could be killing killing the identity here. So, for example, in the Armenian genocide, many Armenian children, if they weren't killed, they were given to Turkish families and they were raised in a Turkish way. So, they were given Turkish names. They were raised to practice Islam instead of Christianity. They dressed like Turks would dress instead of Armenians. So basically, although those children were alive, the Armenian in them was killed. Now, if we take that whole definition and break it down, there's really two parts to it. And of course, they're kind of complicated parts and very specific parts in definition, but two main parts: intent and action. So if I skip intent for a second, action, that's actually doing something. That's what you really get in trouble for. But the intent has to be there for genocide also. And that's the hard part to prove. You can prove action. You can prove if someone did something, but it's really hard to prove what their intent was, if they did it on purpose. So that's where a lot of the issues come in as far as genocide goes, because almost all genocides are a little bit controversial. Was the intent to kill this group of people, or was the intent to send a message and not to kill all of them, or was the intent to relieve problems in the economy or something like that? So you have to prove that the intent was to kill, as to eliminate those people. So if I give you an example of one thing we hear a lot, called a lot of genocide, is the U.S. government and the Native Americans. People say, oh, the U.S. government committed genocide on the Native Americans. If you look at that definition, some parts of it fit, but did the U.S. government intend to kill all Native Americans? Or did the U.S. government intend to destroy the identity of Native Americans? And now there's examples of that. Like, for example, there was something called the Carlisle School, where their motto was kill the Indian, not the man. In other words, we're going to take your culture away and make you pretty much as white as we possibly can. And that way we'll save you and you can contribute to society. This is all in air quotes, because that's kind of what they thought. So would that be genocide? And it was just, there's a couple schools that did that. If that was at a nationwide level, and it was, and the government took all Native American children and made them go to the schools, then yes, that could be considered genocide, but it really wasn't very widespread. Were there some Native Americans who were killed by the U.S. government? Innocent Native Americans, women, children, yes. Was it widespread, and was the intent to kill all Native Americans, to kill their identity? No. It would be pretty tough to prove that because of the existence of reservations. I mean, the Trail of Tears was a horrific event, but the goal wasn't to kill all the Cherokee. The goal was to move them. And now it's almost like you want to say that it's genocide because it's so bad, but it's hard to comprehend that it could have been worse. So there's my definitions. Intent is the purpose, and action is a systematic pattern. So it's not just what you do. It has to be systematic. It has to be coordinated And that all comes from the definition. So think about to yourself, is there anything you would add or remove? Maybe the groups of people is as a common thing I get. There's nothing in there about um, gender or about gender identity or about sexual preference or there's probably more that you could add into that. There's a lot of groups that go under the radar. And this definition was made in the wake of the genocide, not too long after World War II. So obviously the world has changed a bit since then. So maybe it's time for an update of the definition of genocide. All right, the last term we're going to learn about today is ethnic cleansing. Well, here's the definition. Ethnic cleansing is the removal of a specific group of people from a specific area. This can be done by mass murder or removal. The goal of ethnic cleansing is to remove the group of people, not necessarily to eliminate them. So, in other words, the intent of ethnic cleansing is to remove the group, not to eliminate them. So you would say, going back to the Native American example, it's one that we're all probably familiar with, hopefully, that would be ethnic cleansing. That wouldn't be genocide, because the goal was to remove Native Americans from specific areas. They were always being pushed away from wherever they were, but the goal wasn't just to round them up and kill them. That probably could have been done, but it wasn't. Not that I'm saying, oh, the U.S. government's great because they didn't kill everyone. Obviously not, but we can't say that what happened there is just as bad as other genocides in history. As we learn about them, you'll see that they were pretty horrific, unfortunately. Neither are great things, but it's kind of like if you know someone who you just can't stand, they're just a really bad person, whether it's someone you actually know or a celebrity or whatever, you can't call them a murderer if they didn't murder anybody, right? You can call them all kinds of things. You can get creative with what you call them, but if you call them a murderer and they didn't murder anybody, that doesn't make sense, and actually makes it look like you don't know what you're talking about. So when you do criticize that person in other ways, people might not believe you because you're making stuff up. So it's important to use the right terms in terms of your own credibility. So these are pretty interesting discussion topics that we can't discuss because I'm on the internet right now. But maybe something to think about. We hear a lot about tolerance, and you have to decide, I guess, when tolerance is positive and when it could be dangerous. All right, so to kind of close this up, I have a couple of review questions. I don't have a definition or an answer for these because these are kind of going to be different from student to student, but the first question is if you could reread the definition of Holocaust in your own words. Remember, everyone knows what the Holocaust is, but remember the definition is only refers to the 6 million Jews killed, not the 5 million non-Jewish people targeted and killed. Also, genocide. In your own words, what is genocide? And don't forget about that quiz coming up. Fill in the blanks. You need to know that definition. What are the two elements of genocide? Answer to that is intent and action. How are groups defined according to the definition of genocide? There are 4 groups. They are national, ethnic, racial, and religious. Okay, again, in other words, what is ethnic cleansing? Remember, that is removing people from a specific area, and sometimes mass murder is there to kind of scare them out of that area, but the difference between ethnic cleansing and genocide is intent. Intent to destroy an identity or a group of people is not present in ethnic cleansing where it is in genocide. So why is it important to have a definition? Again, it avoids ambiguity, so everyone has the same idea. Again, like I talked about with if I say a red fruit, well, that's confusing. There's lots of red fruits, but if I say apple, you know exactly what I'm saying. Someone in California and England and Australia and New Zealand, they all know what I mean when I say apple. But if I say red fruit, there's different red fruits around the world also. So it's it's good that we have a specific definition that is universally accepted. And also, fake news. if the word genocide is accepted by the international community, usually we're talking the UN here, then we know that it's very, very likely to be an actual genocide. It's not even like the West versus the East. Russia, China, they both have veto power in the UN, so if there's something that they don't like, they can just veto it. So if Russia and China and the US agree that something is a genocide, it's probably a genocide. But if we didn't have that definition, then it'd be tough to prove that. Okay, so that's the notes. I do want to go over this assignment that you are going to be doing pretty soon here. So you work in groups. You're kind of already in groups in 3 or 4 in the room. You're going to have a different article than your partner. You are going to be reading about the Rohingya situation. It hasn't been deemed a genocide yet. It's still ongoing. It's not as bad as it was recently, but it's still, like I said, still happening. So there we have a country, Myanmar, to give you a little bit of background, also known as Burma. And they are kicking out this group of people called the Rohingya. Now, the Rohingya is an ethnic group. See, it's not national, it's not racial, but it is ethnic. And they basically want them to leave, or they want them all to be eliminated. That's kind of up to you to figure out. Now, this isn't a Holocaust, right? Because that was something that happened once. We won't ever have another Holocaust again because it already happened. But we will, unfortunately, very likely have a genocide again. So is this a genocide or is this an ethnic cleansing? That's really what you're trying to figure out based on this information here. Everyone has 3 different articles from 3 different sources. So you're going to work together to decide, based on the definition, whether or not this would be a genocide. Here's the directions, and this concludes the first notes.